Chapter 9 takes a look at the general and special senses. So in this chapter, we'll explain how the organization of receptors for the general senses and the special senses affect their sensitivity. We'll identify the receptors for general senses and describe how they function. Then we'll describe the sensory organs of smell and discuss the process involved in olfaction. We're going to describe sensory organs of taste next and describe the process of gustation. We'll identify the internal and accessory structures of the eye and explain their functions, and then identify how we form visual images and distinguish colors. And we'll discuss how the central nervous system processes visual information. In section 9-7, we'll describe the parts of the external, middle, and inner ear, and the receptors they contain, and then we're going to discuss the processes involved in equilibrium and hearing. Your textbook has a nice section at the end of this chapter that discusses aging and smell, taste, vision, and hearing, which you can cover on your own time. So really, our knowledge of the world around us is limited to those characteristics that stimulate our sensory receptors. The specialized cells or cell processes that monitor the conditions inside or outside the body are called sensory receptors. The simplest receptors are the dendrites of sensory nerves, and the branching tips are called free nerve endings. The most complex receptors, such as the visual receptors of the eye, are protected by accessory cells and layers of connective tissue. So therefore, these specialized sensors for light are rarely exposed to any other stimulus other than light. Now, the area monitored by a single receptor is its receptor field. The smaller the receptive field, the more precise the sensory information, like those in your tongue or your fingertips. The larger the field, the more difficult it is to detect the exact location of the stimulus, like those receptor fields on your arm. Now, all of the sensory information arrives at the central nervous system in the form of action potentials in a sensory fiber. The stronger the stimulus, the higher the frequency of the action potentials. Remember from the last chapter that this is interpreted as a sensation. These sensations are then routed according to the location and nature of the stimulus to the appropriate region of the cerebral cortex. For example, touch or stimuli go to the primary sensory cortex, visual information goes to the visual cortex, so on and so forth. Now, the conscious awareness of a sensation is called perception. Another term, adaptation, listed here. Adaptation is a reduction in sensitivity to the presence of a constant stimulus. This is achieved by reducing the amount of information arriving at the cerebral cortex. Really, only about 1% of the information provided by your afferent fibers reaches the cerebral cortex and our conscious awareness to become perception. The receptors for general senses occur throughout the body, and the receptors for the 5 special senses are concentrated within special structures, the sense organs. So the general senses are going to provide us with information about temperature, pain, touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception, which is body position. Our special senses include olfaction, which is the sense of smell, gustation, which is the sense of taste, vision, and equilibrium and hearing are both special senses found in the organ of the ear. General sensory receptors are classified by the type of stimulus that activates them. Nociceptors are free nerve endings that respond to pain associated with extremes of temperature, mechanical damage, and dissolved chemicals. We have a couple of different types of pain. There's fast pain. Fast pain is transmitted to the central nervous system through myelinated axons. Slow pain is transmitted by unmyelinated axons, like burning or aching. And referred pain is a perception of pain in an unrelated area of the body. You can see figure 9-2 for examples of sensations that originate in visceral organs and then they're perceived as pain in other body regions innervated by that same spinal nerve. Another type of general sensory receptor is a thermoreceptor. These also are free nerve endings that respond to temperature. In the dermis, skeletal muscles, liver, and the hypothalamus, they use the same pathway as pain receptors, but thermoreceptors are adaptive, meaning that they typically only alert you to changes in temperature. There are 3 classes of mechanoreceptors. Tactile receptors respond to fine touch, pressure, crude touch, and pressure receptors in the skin. Baroreceptors respond to pressure, and these are found in major blood vessels, your lung, digestive, and urinary tracts. And then the last mechanoreceptor is the proprioceptors, which respond to position, tension in tendons and ligaments, as well as the state of muscle contraction. Last but not least are the chemoreceptors. These are going to respond to chemicals that are in solution in body fluids. So this includes your central nervous system receptors that monitor your cerebral spinal fluid, your plasma concentrations of carbon dioxide, and pH. Some of the key peripheral chemoreceptors for plasma, carbon dioxide, and pH are in the carotid bodies and the aortic bodies inside those major vessels. So this brings us to our first checkpoint. So I have a couple of questions for you. You can pause the recording before you move on to the next section to answer these questions. The next section in your textbook looks at the sense of smell, or olfaction. And this is provided by a pair of olfactory organs. These are located in the nasal cavity on either side of the nasal septum, pictured here. Each olfactory organ consists of olfactory epithelium, which contains olfactory receptor cells. This is pictured in the enlarged portion. In addition to olfactory receptor cells, you also have supporting cells and a regenerative basal stem cell layer. The underlying areolar tissue contains large olfactory glands. And these are going to create secretions that absorb water, and they form a pigmented mucus that covers the entire epithelium. Olfactory receptor cells are modified neurons with chemical receptors called odorant binding proteins on the cilia. Axons are going to project from the olfactory epithelium, and they're bundled, and they pass through the cribriform plates of the ethmoid bone into the olfactory bulb, and you can see this pictured on the figure on the right. The olfactory tracts then extend back to the olfactory cortex of the cerebrum, the hypothalamus, and the limbic system. The binding of an odorant is going to change the permeability of the receptor plasma membrane and produce action potentials. This information is then relayed to the central nervous system, which interprets it as smell based on the particular pattern of the reception activity. Next is taste, or gustatory sensations. These gustatory receptors are distributed over the surface of the tongue and adjacent portions of the pharynx and the larynx. The most important ones, however, are on the tongue. Specialized epithelial cells form taste buds that lie along the sides of the epithelial projections called papillae. The greatest number of taste buds are associated with the large circumvallate papillae at the base of the tongue. Each taste bud contains sensory receptors known as gustatory cells and supporting cells. Each gustatory cell has microvilli called taste hairs that extend into the surrounding fluids through the taste pore. Taste is similar to smell, where you have dissolved chemicals that contact taste hairs, and then they stimulate a change in the membrane potential, which leads to an action potential in the sensory neuron. The primary taste sensations are sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami, which is like a savory flavor. We also have receptors in the pharynx for water. Now, taste cell axons are found in the facial nerves number 7, the glossopharyngeal nerve number 9, and the vagus nerve number 10. These fibers synapse in the medulla oblongata, and those neurons extend into the thalamus. Neurons from there project in the primary sensory cortex. So we've reached yet another checkpoint. See if you can answer these questions before you move on to the next section.